I'd like to pick up on what Katie said and talk a little bit about both January 6th, but also Mar-a-Lago. So, Mar-a-Lago explodes into view August 8th with the search, and it's first this document retrieval operation. Now we know clearly, in fact, again, they've said it to the court. We have a criminal investigation to pursue. If you're Garland, or just as you, what are the relative virtues and downsides of January 6th as opposed to Mar-a-Lago as bases for prosecution? And is there any, one thing we do know is January 6th would take a lot longer to develop. Is there any reasonable prospect that they actually would do both?
Well, I think that they're such incredibly different investigations that it's probably wrong to think of them even in the same sentence. I try to keep them as separate as possible. I know. Thanks. I can see Harry's paper, so I know that he separated them. But at the end of the day, the document search case was something that the department was probably taken by surprise. It probably took the department by surprise, because you would think that at the end of the day, when the National Archives asks for their objects back, people do return them. We definitely have had people leave office with things they shouldn't have had, and they do return them. This is not the first time in history this has ever happened. But it was not only the amount of paper, documents, materials, it was the prolonged period, by which representatives of the former president said they didn't have anything anymore, or that they weren't sure what was going on. And then it leads to this raid because now the Justice Department feels that they have been lied to. And so it feels like a very straightforward case. Somebody takes something they shouldn't have, they keep it when they say they aren't going to, and then they lie to federal authorities about it. And that's what we've seen in the filings. Now that's something that, you can see how that investigation will work, and you know that at some point in time Garland is going to have to say yes or no to charging on one of those statutes. That, again, is so different from what we see with January 6th, which is this sort of complicated mess of investigations. You had the huge investigation into the people who attacked the Capitol. We're trying to figure out their motives. Do those motives lead us somewhere? What about other people involved with these plots to keep Trump in power, whether it was the scheme to have fake electors and several swing states ready to say that they had actually voted for Donald Trump when they hadn't. These are all things the department needs to investigate on their own, and then decide if there's even any connection that they can make in a court of law with evidence that's so compelling that it's beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury that Donald Trump directed any of those things. That is such a much harder hurdle, and that is something that will take so much longer. And I think that it's really, for people who are thinking about whether or not Trump will be prosecuted, the documents case is the one to watch. January 6th is I think, very, very unclear, and it's very nascent.
I agree with everything Katie said. Charlie said something I think really important a minute ago, that democracy is too important to be left to prosecutors. No offense to all the prosecutors. Another way to say that is I think we as a country, during the Trump years, kept asking prosecutors, whether the Justice Department or others, to bail us out, to bail the country out, and somehow take Trump out of the picture in a way that voters hadn't been able to. And that is asking a lot of the criminal statutes. It's asking a lot of prosecutors. It wasn't necessarily a problem that they could solve. And that's kind of how I felt about the January 6th investigation. It's clear that Trump, violated his oath of office and committed grave acts, against the Constitution. Whether it's a violation of the criminal statutes, you can look at the criminal statutes and make a case, but I challenge you to show me anyone that's been prosecuted in our history for anything like what he is alleged to have done. There is no real precedent for bringing that type of case. So I do think one of the things Garland was probably feeling, if Trump was out of the picture and wasn't planning to run again, or had he been convicted in his second impeachment and barred from running, maybe he doesn't take the January 6th investigation as seriously. But I suspect he's feeling this weight that because Trump is an ongoing threat to democracy, maybe we have to be the ones that do something about it. And they would never admit that publicly. They would always say, we only look at the facts and the law. But of course, if you're the Attorney General, you have to think of the other consequences. But I think because it's such a hard case, and much harder than I think people believe, I think the Mar-a-Lago case has been a almost bailed the Justice Department out, because unlike January 6th, if you just look at the facts, there are people with much better fact sets who have gone to jail for what Trump did. And
nobody who hasn't, as best I can tell.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So if at the end of this investigation, you have a former president who mishandled classified information and then obstructed, that's always the important thing. It's always just mishandling classified information. There has to be some other thing. You disclosed it or you obstructed. It's kind of mishandling plus, and he's done that. And you don't bring the case, it's very hard to justify then bringing other cases against low-level workers at the Pentagon and the intelligence community that we see over and over again. So I think is made probably at the end of this, the decision much easier for Garland.
So I agree with that, but a slightly different point of view. So there strikes me that there's two imperatives, or maybe three, that we're dealing with here. Number one is preventing Donald Trump from returning to power. Number two, holding Donald Trump legally accountable for his conduct. And number three, establishing the precedent that no one is above the law, that ex-presidents, in fact, are not immune from prosecution. Now, the Department of Justice cannot directly affect the first, preventing him. The Department of Justice has limited ability to do this. It can only really do number two and number three. It can hold him accountable. Now, while I completely agree with everything you just said about, go for the airtight, document case. This would, I think that realistically, Merrick Garland also has to understand that going small will generate the same political firestorm as going big. There's not going to be a moderated response, based on how much they charge him for. So as much as I would love Donald Trump to be nailed on one of these airtight, sort of legal headshot issues, where a tax issue Al Capone. I also think that it's important for Garland to realize the historic significance of his action, to explain that this is not just a gotcha, that this is, and I apologize to Willie Nelson here, this is a big fucking deal. This is the President of the United States. Why does it matter? We're not just dealing with a common grifter who broke the law. We're dealing with a President of the United States who used his power to overturn an election, to incite an insurrection, to put it in that historic context, but also to explain to people why you are doing something so dramatically unprecedented. The small charges may serve the function, and again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just thinking this through. May serve the function of holding Trump accountable, but I also think that it's important to make it clear why they need to protect the Constitution, because we're now talking about precedents that will affect, I think, the constitutional order for the next 50, 60, 70 years. And I think that has to weigh on their minds as well.
So I think that you're getting it. I mean, we're all sort of circling around something that's really difficult, which is it's almost impossible to separate the political from the prosecutorial, which is what Garland came in to do. He said he wants to depoliticize the Department of Justice. But if what you're doing is thinking about criminally charging the leader of a political party in the United States of America, wildly popular leader of a political party in the United States of America, a leader whose members will not deviate from, even when they've tried to, as we've read in all sorts of books, including yours, including Mark Leibovich's book, et cetera, that is inherently then a political act. And so what you want is for Merrick Garland to rise to that moment, that political moment, by going big, because it's such a big political question. But at the same time, he's hemmed in by the rules of the Justice Department, which say, no. We can really only charge on the crimes we can truly prove. And so he cannot do the thing that you want, even though his actions and his task is political in a way that he cannot separate himself from. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. If there is a figure in Washington, D.C. right now who is a tragic figure, like a classically tragic figure, think Shakespeare, think, go further back, think, Oedipus, et cetera. Like, if you think he is in this situation where he must make a choice. He doesn't get to not make the choice. We know he has to. And the choice is going to it's not going to resolve the tensions in the country. It's going to inflame them.
Yes.
and he needs to do it, and he has to say to himself, do I try to protect this bigger system and these bigger ideals, or do I follow the rule book that I'm given that in no way addresses those bigger ideals?